Good evening. It's great to be with you again, and welcome to our music forum, the second in our series of music forums. This is a slightly unusual event in that we are pre-recording this one owing to the lockdown restrictions. So it's a great pleasure to welcome today our cellist, a brilliant cellist, my friend and colleague Lionel Handy. Thank you for being here, Lionel, on this pre-recording session.
Thank you for having me. Very nice to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure. And Lionel will be playing a number of works for cello this afternoon during the recording session. And this, of course, will be broadcast at the regularly scheduled time for the actual live streaming, which will be the same as always, except that we will not be able to do the question and answer period. We will resume with true live streaming in December with our next music forum on Friday the 4th of December, which features the young harpist Elizabeth Bass, who will be here with us playing a wide range of repertoire for solo harp, which is quite unusual in and of itself. Today, we are very pleased to hear a number of British compositions, as well as the heroic, almost transcendent, or even transcendent Bach Suite for solo cello, the third of six, C major suite. In addition to that, we'll start off with some works or excerpts for works for solo cello. And let's see, Lionel, you had mentioned a couple of things to me. I came to know you through mutual friends and colleagues, but I listened to your extraordinary recording of the Sir Arnold Bach's Cello Concerto. I guess it was done a couple of years ago with the Scottish National Symphony.
Well, that's right. I recorded that back in 2014. Right. It was part of a big project. I had to record all the works of Sir Arnold Bach's. He wrote three sonatina, a legend sonata, and a big sonata in E-flat minor, a small solo piece called Rhapsodic Ballad, very rarely played, a little bit of folk tale, which I'm going to play a little bit of in a second, and then, of course, the big cello concerto, which was written for Gaspar Casado, who was perhaps the most famous pupil of Pablo Casals.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, why don't we dive right in? If you're able to play a little bit of the folk tune for us, that would be fantastic.
So it's a folk tale by Bach's. I'm just going to play you the first phrase and then a little bit of a development of that first phrase. This was written in 1918. But he extends this idea with
It's fantastic. It's extremely evocative.
a little taste of,
It's really wonderful, and it contrasts with the concerto in so many different ways.
Yes.
So.
Bach was very, very influenced by Ireland, and this folk tale title actually was added by the publisher as a sort of gimmick to sell the work. There's actually, in fact, quite a nostalgic, melancholy reflection of his memories of Ireland before the First World War and before the Easter uprising of 1916.
Right. That's very interesting, and you mentioned something interesting as well when you're talking about the publisher adding the sort of nickname folktale. That's not uncommon. The Moonlight Sonata was Beethoven didn't imagine that as having anything to do with the moon. But the title was added as an effort to help sell publications, and these titles can be evocative and it can be helpful. So,
Absolutely, yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit of a piece that I don't know at all, which you were describing to me in some of our earlier conversations, by a Plymouth-based, Plymouth-born composer.
Absolutely.
Is that right? Stanley Bate?
Stanley Bate.
Another cello concerto?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Stanley Bate, when I was talking about this Bach's project, I needed a second concerto to go with the Bach's concerto, and my producer chap said there is a cello concerto by Stanley Bate. He'd recorded the viola concerto, and he said, why don't you look it out? I knew that Stanley Bate had studied in his youth. He was born in Plymouth, but then he studied in London with Vaughan Williams, amongst others. And luckily, my first port of call was to go to the Royal College of Music Library, where I found the manuscript of this concerto. So it was quite an effort, I have to say, getting the music transcribed into a Sibelius form that we could read, getting all the orchestral parts made up, and then organising the recording. But I think it's a brilliant piece, short, only 22 minutes. I think there's two reasons why maybe it's not well known, really, and that's the fact that unfortunately Stanley Bate used a very big orchestra, which probably puts off certain people, really, because obviously it's a much more expensive item to do a huge project like that. Yeah, as I say, he was born in Plymouth, went to America. Actually, I did discover the other day that he actually was on the same boat as Benjamin Britten, and I'm not sure that their relationship was entirely cordial. Shall I say, to put it tactfully.
Okay.
But no, I think it's a brilliant. The second reason why I don't think this is played so much is that it's very, very difficult. Not terribly idiomatic writing for the cello. I'm just going to play you the opening of each three movements, all the three movements. There's the first two movements are about 8 to 8.5 minutes each, and the last movement is a sort of a light-hearted, shorter movement, 5 minutes. But I should have been, maybe you were going to mention, I should have been playing this in Hong Kong.
You were that's right. This was on your schedule to perform this in Hong Kong, and that was postponed owing to the pandemic. Is that correct?
That's right. It would have been this month, actually. Yeah. But it's been put back to next year. I'm still not quite sure. Right. I think the pandemic, and there's also difficult situations in Hong Kong. So,
well, yes.
But there's a festival orchestra that are very keen to play it. So I'm hoping to do it. But can I just play you the opening of...
That would be great. Yeah. You know, I guess it would be this may be the first time in Plymouth that parts of this work are heard. Is that right?
Plausible, absolutely. Because Stanley Bate was in America in the early 50s when he wrote this.
Right.
There's a record of it having been performed once in Rochester, New York. Mm-hmm. But it's all very vague, and I can't even discover who the solo cellist was.
Gosh. And it hasn't been premiered properly in the UK.
No.
How extraordinary.
No.
Well, let us hear a bit then.
Okay. That's the opening of the piece. The second movement, obviously a contrast, a calmer piece, very atmospheric, obviously a little bit naked without the orchestral strings, but it has rather a beautiful theme. It goes like this. And finally, the third movement, which quite a different mood, obviously.
It seems to use the full resources of the cello.
Absolutely.
It's quite a piece.
4 octaves, very readily exploited by Mr. Bate.
Was he a cellist himself?
I don't think so.
Right.
I don't think so.
Gosh. Well, you know, the interesting thing is that it's interesting to me that it hasn't been played here. It should be.
Yeah.
And you're just the person to do it. I mean, I hope that can happen.
Well, I hope so too. Thank you.
I think let's take a step back and talk about what a concerto actually is, because we've been fortunate that you've been able to share with us some of the main themes. And of course, concerto, the word means, the etymology of the word is cooperation. It's about doing something in concert or in cooperation with others, right?
Yes, yes.
So who is cooperating with whom? It's the way the musical form of a concerto has evolved is that there's a featured solo instrument, in this case, the cello, and the orchestra is cooperating with it and featuring it in certain ways. And there are different means of expressing that cooperation, right? I mean, if we go back to Mozart, there's usually a form of a concerto is usually somewhat operatic in that there's an orchestra beginning. Mm-hmm. I don't want to say introduction because it's real, you know, it's important.
Orchestra tutti, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Everyone's playing together from the outset,
yeah.
Except for the soloist. And the soloist then takes some of the main themes and maybe extemporizes from those themes that were heard when everyone was playing together. Yeah. And so it's a kind of cooperation that's established from the outset with, you know, in Mozart's day, maybe 30 or 40 people in the orchestra and a soloist. And often the soloist was also the conductor, and sometimes it was even the composer. Things moved on, and we'll get to the debate in a moment.
Yeah.
But things moved on, and Beethoven, ever the innovator and always trying to push the envelope, instead of having the big orchestra start, in his 4th piano concerto, he had the piano start, which was a bit of a surprise.
Absolutely.
So that work starts this way. And then the orchestra comes in with this. So the orchestra takes the theme that the piano seemingly improvised, not really, but seemingly,
yes,
and has the long togetherness episode at that point. Now with the Bate concerto, Stanley Bate,
yeah.
It sounds to me, I mean, I've never heard any of this before, but am I right in thinking that you, the cellist, opened the piece?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, here we are, single person, single instrument, not the span of the piano with 88 keys, but you have 4 strings, right?
Yeah.
And you have this big orchestra, maybe 100, 110 people to cooperate with,
yes.
to make music with, to play in concert with. And you start. Could you start for us again? Because I think that's an extraordinary moment when the cello starts this piece. And it seems to come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And it starts with which string?
The low C string.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're just the music. You're calling forth the muse, as it were, from the lowest open string on the cello.
That's right.
And then you start, and then the orchestra presumably comes in after the opening drama.
Yeah.
And off you are.
Yeah. It's a very fine work. I think it should be played.
Yeah.
Incidentally, if I can just interrupt you slightly, somebody once said there's two problems when playing a concerto. Either you have to sit there for ages while the orchestra does its tutti, then you have to come in, or you're right in at the beginning. And he said the worst concerto of all is Beethoven 4, because you have a few bars of your own at the beginning, then you have to wait. So I think it's very brave people that play this Beethoven 4th concerto.
It's a wonderful piece. It's a fantastic piece. One of the longest orchestral tutti or together sections that I know of is in the Brahms First Piano Concerto.
Yes.
Which is marked, and I've had arguments even with conductors about this. The tempo, we've talked about tempo in a previous music forum where we established that tempo is really important in music. And so the Brahms First Piano Concerto is marked simply maestoso, majestic. And it's in 6/4 meter. Now we're going into some detail here, but it's part of the important element of this piece. 6/4 meter is not a fast tempo. And there's nothing that's fast about being majestic. You can't rush his or her majesty, right?
That's right.
So I take the 6/4 and the majestic element, the character of majesty, quite seriously. And the orchestral opening could be 5 or 6 minutes, and then the piano comes in.
Yeah.
So they're all you're absolutely right. There are many challenges in this cooperation.
Yes.
But it's music making together. And that's
another fantastic concerto. One of my favorites, the Brahms First.
It is. It's fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about your cello. You sound fantastic, and so does your cello.
Well,
what instrument are you playing?
This is an English cello, actually, by the maker Bernard Simon Fendt. That's F-E-N-D-T. So I guess English he is, but he must have had some German or Austrian origin. And English cellos have come into their own, really. Previous generations would always aspire to an Italian instrument. Obviously, the best known is Stradivarius, and in the cello world, Montagnana also. I was very fortunate to have a Montagnana on loan for many years. And I thought, gosh, if I ever have to give this back, I'm never ever going to find a cello to match it that I can afford to buy. But I'm very happy to say that people that have heard this cello reckons it sounds equally as good, if not better, than the other ones.
Well, it sounds terrific. And how old is it? When was it made?
1820.
So it's 200 years old.
Yeah, circa 1820. Right. Yeah, they're not sure exactly. Okay. But it's in very good condition. I knew the luthier who restored this cello, and he happened to say to me, if anything happens to your Italian cello, remember there's this one. And apparently he reckoned it was almost in mint condition because the varnish on the shoulder here was brand new. And of course, if you're playing with your hand across it, that varnish will decay very quickly. Right. So I was very lucky to get this cello. So
that's fantastic. What's it like to tell everyone what it's like to travel with your instrument?
A total nightmare. You buy a ticket for your cello. You go to the airport. Oh, you can't bring that on the plane. You have problems getting it through customs, and I've even had to take it out of the case. And I've actually had corners knocked off the cello by people being brutal with scanning devices, scanning things. Then you have a seat for your cello, and even then you're on the plane. They say, oh, it's a bit difficult. You can't fit that in here. I had one bizarre episode not so long ago when I was actually told my cello could stay in its seat, but I would have to get off the plane because the seats didn't marry up somehow. But no, it is very difficult travelling with a cello. I don't think any cellist would tell you it's easy.
Yeah, I've heard stories about all kinds of things from colleagues who are cellists, and it sounds like a continual challenge.
It is difficult.
As a pianist, I feel fortunate to just travel with my music. Sometimes the challenges are on the other end when you get there because you have to try to make the best of whatever instrument that you're confronted with. But oftentimes it's, like this piano is wonderful. And there are many others. Sometimes, though, you get a nasty surprise. But at least there are no issues such of the sort that you're dealing with. Do you get an extra meal for your cello on the plane?
Not usually.
Oh, okay.
I try and get an extra drink, but sometimes I achieve that, but sometimes not.
All right. And then when we were talking a little bit before the mics were officially on, you told me something that I found absolutely extraordinary. I know it's a personal tale of sorts, but it's a tale of, I think, extraordinary bravery and courage. And how would you feel about sharing some of that with everyone?
Yeah, no, that's okay. This is I was travelling. I was in Germany actually back in 2007, and I woke up the next morning in hospital, and apparently I'd sleptwalked and suffered some really very bad injuries. I was in hospital for 9 weeks, and I had 3 massive operations, and it was a very grim time, obviously a grim time for me, but also my family. I didn't know at that point whether I'd be able to ever play the cello again. But little by little, I didn't have to relearn, but I had to retrain my muscles, because I do have a large metal bolt through my left shoulder, and I have metal in my neck. And it was a grim time, but as I lay there in hospital, I did think, that was 2007, I thought, well, if ever I do get better, I would love to play the Elliott Carter Sonata, the wonderful American composer who was born in 1908 and was still alive. He lived to 103, I think. But I wanted to play this in 2008, and I did this series of concerts, and then it led on to a recording, and I think I've just done my 7th solo CD. So it was an effort. It was getting back to full playing ability. But
it sounds extraordinary. I mean, I can't really imagine what it must have been like to retrain your muscles. I mean, you told me that the hospitalization was extremely serious. Your condition was, the odds of living were very small, you told me.
Yes, very low.
We're all fortunate that you pulled through in the sterling manner that you have. And then to retrain your muscles and to have the aspirations of embarking on a big project like the Carter Cello Sonata is absolutely inspirational. It's wonderful.
Well, it's a massively difficult piece at any time, actually. And this should be played more, but I think the thing is, it's not only difficult for the cello, difficult for the piano, and difficult to put together. So you can't, two virtuosi can't just meet on the day and then play the Carter. It has to be very worked at a lot.
Right. And you told me that after the recording, you found yourself in New York one morning and decided to present Elliott with a copy of his.
Well, I actually thought I was going to Elliott Carter's agent to give him this CD I'd recorded, just to sort of thank him, really. And I went to this address, and actually it turned out to be Elliott Carter's private house. So I met the great man. I'd met him because I'd worked with the London Sinfonietta a few times. So I'd met him. He already signed very kindly signed my cello part of the sonata. He's a very wonderful man, wonderful composer. And he was, and I said, thank you very much for writing this wonderful sonata. He'd written it way back in 1948. Right. But he said to me, and he looked at me, and he said, he was completely with it, and he said, well, thank you very much. We composers don't get compliments very often. And that made me feel very pleased that I'd gone to see him. But as I say, he lived to 103, did very well.
Yes, and and you saw him when he was about 100?
Yeah.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
He roamed the corridors of Juilliard in the best possible ways at times when I was there, and there were other composers there at the same time, as we began to discuss a little bit earlier today.
Yes.
Milton Babbitt was there at the same time as Elliott, and they were friends. They had very different styles of composing, but they were friends and colleagues, and they went to each other's performances. If Elliott was having a piece done, Milton was in the audience, and vice versa. And there were others in that panoply of stars, in that pantheon of stars as well. There was Vincent Persichetti and David Diamond, and of course Roger Sessions was the old man at that time. And they would support one another. I've played a lot of the music of Milton Babbitt, as some might know, and find it always challenging and extremely involving and exciting in many ways. It's great to be involved.
Very demanding, isn't it?
Very demanding, but so what? It's good. Don't shirk demands. Rise to them. And you've played some Babbitt as well. Is that right?
Yeah, we did. I had a quartet long time ago, and we gave the British premiere of the Babbitt Third Quartet.
A big piece.
It was a big piece, and we found it extremely difficult, but we got a very nice review in The Guardian, I remember. So,
excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one of the difficulties about Milton's music is what the perceived rhythmic complexities.
Yes.
But in knowing the man and speaking with him and always playing work for him, playing his works first before premiering them or playing them in public, playing them for him privately, I remember him many times saying words to the effect of, "Bob, that's the Chopin Nocturne section of this work,"
Yeah.
Or "Take a little more time here." You know, he was always smoothing things over. These rhythmic complexities that sometimes seem so thorny, they're almost like written out rubatos.
Yes.
You know, in Chopin you can encounter 6 against 7 as well.
Yeah.
And all you do is just start together and keep going.
Yes, somehow. Yeah.
Somehow. Right,
That's
exactly.
right, yeah.
So, anyway.
Yeah.
All right, let's switch gears from, you know, recent music and music of our time to music that was written closer to the time that your cello was built than we are now. That is the Bach suites.
Yeah.
Bach wrote these suites, what, 1720-ish?
Yeah, that's
around
right.
there.
Yeah.
The cello was built 100 years later.
Yeah.
It's now 200 years after that.
That's right.
And the Bach suites still pertain today. They still move us. They still not only exist, but flourish.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what are they? There's 6 of them, but what does it mean to, you know, when we talk about a suite by Bach?
Well, the 6 cello suites, they have the same format, if you like, a prelude followed by an allemande, courant, sarabande. The penultimate movement is the one that varies. It's the minuets in the first 2 suites, bourrées in suites 3 and 4. So I'm playing bourrées today, and then a jig to finish the suite. So it's the prelude followed by the contrasting dances.
Right. And so I think that's a critical thing. These are stylized dances.
Yes.
You know? They each have their own characteristics. The allemande, I believe, was characterized by intricate hand movements. Courant was characterized by tiny little steps, almost like a current of steps.
Yeah.
The sarabande was more of a stately dance that was, as I understand, almost archaic even in Bach's day. I mean,
Okay. Yeah.
people in Bach's day danced the allemande or the courant or minuets, but no longer do they dance the sarabande.
Yeah.
The sarabande is characterized, I think, by, you know, a certain kind of metrical structure, and its mood can vary. It's almost capturing something from the past, almost wistful in a way. So that metrical structure is always 3 beats per bar. It's a triple meter.
Yeah.
And the emphasis on the first 4 bars, the first little cell of the piece, is by definition of what a sarabande is. The first measure is 1, 2, and the second measure is also 1, 2, so a kind of silent third beat. And the third measure is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So if we take just the sarabande from, you know, one of the piano suites, and there are also 6 piano suites of a certain type. There's 6 English suites, or 6 French suites, or 6 partitas, as he called them. This is from the C minor partita, the sarabande, and we can hear the emphasis or the metrical stress of the first 4 bars. So the first bar is 1, 2, and then 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And it goes on from there. But within this sort of strict definition of a sarabande that Bach essentially adhered to, there's some minor exceptions, or maybe major exceptions. that structure enables him to be extremely expressive in certain ways. And I'm sure we'll hear that in the sarabande that you'll play for us in the C major suite. But in the bourrées, which are unusual, break the established pattern of having minuets.
Yeah.
There's a contrast in mood in these. Is that right? In these
Yeah, I mean, very, very clearly, the first bourrées, C major, very clearly. And the second one, it makes an obvious contrast. C minor, and then finishing in the relative, the E flat major. But yes, a wistful contrast, a million miles really from the rather joyful opening.
The exuberant.
Opening, exactly.
Yeah. So some of the challenges that I find in playing Bach, and let's have a frank and open discussion about this.
Sure.
If you're confronted by the black dots on the page, the notes that have existed for 300 years,
yes,
the big question is, what do you do with them? And so along the way, certain editors and scholars have suggested certain ideas of phrasing or dynamics and ways to group the notes, the loudness or softness of the notes, to connect or not to connect. That's those sorts of articulations.
yeah,
But if you look at the actual closest we can get to what Bach wrote, which sometimes is his autograph score, musical handwriting in his own hand. Or sometimes, in the case of the suites, I believe that his wife, Anna Magdalena Bach, wrote them out. The original text or autograph score is lost, is that right?
indeed, yeah, absolutely.
So if you look at what Anna Magdalena Bach wrote out, and I think we'll have a slide of this, there's very little phrasing, very little. It's not always very clear. Beethoven went to great lengths to be extremely clear.
Yes.
And there is a complete lack of dynamics.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what does that mean?
You have to be incredibly imaginative. You've got to know the piece incredibly well. Harmonically, I think, as well, is very, very important. You can't just sort of suddenly put in fortes and pianos at random moments. It's got to be logical.
Right.
Although, of course, having said that, like all great music, there are many ways of interpreting it.
Right.
When I was a student at the Academy back in the 70s, it was really largely before the early period instrument revival was in full swing. So I basically played it in a rather old-fashioned way, as my teacher would have played it in the middle of the last century. Of course, this cello I have here is a modern cello. I have metal strings. I have an end pin. They wouldn't have had an end pin. I'm playing at an A, about 440, maybe even a little higher. They would have had a lower A. And of course, the bow was a different shape, the Baroque bow. And that meant that really in Bach's time, they played it a very different way. Lots and lots of detached bowing, very different from the way Casals. I mean, he was he was the one that brought them to the fore. Right. But Casals' playing of these suites now is perceived to be a marvellous historical document, but not really how you would play them now.
And that's very interesting in and of itself, because Casals brought them into the modern era, if we want to call it that.
Yes.
And the ways of playing this music, which the music hasn't changed. The ways of hearing it have changed.
No.
I mean, we play what we want to hear, right? And so, and sometimes we hear what we want to play. But in addition to the ways of playing have changed, in addition to the technological, if I can use that word, evolution of the cello to what you're playing, even though it's 1820, you're playing certain elements of steel strings and everything.
Yeah.
And tuning at 440, which was, I think it was 432-ish in the...
or even lower, maybe.
Even lower back then. Okay. What we're... inevitably, our range of hearing, or the way that we perceive things, has changed. Our sphere of hearing as humans in the 21st century has become irrevocably enlarged, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, no airplane engines, right? No
No
streamers.
No one can know exactly what Bach heard.
Right.
I mean, a colleague of mine, wonderful singer Robert Tier, I remember he's saying shortly before he died, this business of historical, being true to the composer is very dubious, because he said he performed with Benjamin Britten when he was a young man, and he said the performances of Britten now, or even 10 years ago, were nothing like the ones of Britten 50, 60 years ago.
That's interesting.
So imagine if you multiply that by
generations.
Yes, generations. Yeah. We don't, and the other thing, of course, is that these pieces don't have metronome marks, but right. Your understanding of the dance should give you an idea. Right. But composers usually write metronome marks too fast. Right. I remember I was playing with the London Sinfonietta. We were doing a quartet by a famous British composer, and he said, "Gosh, you're much too fast." And I said, "But we're doing about 2/3 the speed you've written on your metronome." He said, "Don't worry about that. Composers always write too fast because they hear the music pure. Right. They don't hear the mechanics of how you have to make the music." Right. So
that's an interesting point.
Yeah,
that's a very interesting point. Well, I'd love to hear it. Could you share it with us?
Lovely.
Good.
Thank you.
What a fantastic performance, a fantastic piece. Uses the cello in extraordinary ways. Can you imagine what it must have been like in Bach's day to play or hear this for the first time?
Amazing, yeah.
And I guess for some people may be hearing it for the first time today. So that's okay.
And I think you've also got to remember that basically, until Pablo Casals came along, they hadn't heard it in public for over 100 years as well, after
Right.
Bach's death.
And that was in the 1930s that he
Yeah.
recorded them in
Maybe-
Abbey Road Studios, I think.
Maybe it's, I don't know, you know more than me,
Oh,
but they've been dormant for a long time.
They had been.
People used to play one movement.
Right.
It was, it was a nice little interlude, give the pianist a rest maybe in the recital. But no, they're of course, it seems sacrilegious these days to play one isolated movement, really.
Right. Well, they're conceived as an
Yes.
entire suite.
It's like looking at half a painting or something.
Right, exactly.
Sort
Can you
of
imagine? Yeah.
crazy.
Let's just look at that quadrant of a painting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, absolutely amazing. And to use and play the cello in such an exuberant, extroverted, intimate, introverted manner, the whole spectrum of evoking, communication from the instrument is absolutely extraordinary. So thank you so very, very much.
No, well, thank you. It's always a challenge playing these pieces.
Oh, yeah.
They're always tricky.
Well, you rose to it brilliantly.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Lionel. There's one other thing that you mentioned to me that I know we're kind of nearing the end of our session, but I wonder whether I could persuade you to play a little bit of something that you mentioned in one of our communications earlier when we were planning this session. And that is a little bit of the work of Ethel Smythe.
Yes, indeed.
A solo sonata. Is it a solo sonata?
Cello and piano.
Cello and piano sonata.
Yes.
You uncovered this, is
Yes.
that right?
Ethel Smythe, Dame Ethel Smythe, to give her a proper name, famous suffragette. She actually went to prison before the end of the First World War because she was so vehement about getting the votes for women.
Yeah.
But she wrote, there's a lovely sonata that she wrote, A minor, Opus 5, which is actually published and played, not a lot, but played a little bit. But I did find this reference to an unpublished sonata in C minor earlier. This was written in 1880 when Ethel Smythe was only 22. Mm-hmm. But she was an amazing character because you can imagine for most Victorian women to basically go on hunger strike and refuse to comply with any of her parents' wishes unless they sent her to Germany to study music, which is what she did. She met, Brahms was her idol, but she also met Tchaikovsky, Grieg, these great composers of the end of the 19th century. And I discovered this unpublished sonata in the British Library. I'll just play you a tiny little bit. People think she may have been influenced by Schubert Arpeggione Sonata. Mm-hmm. Schubert's Arpeggione begins like this. And Dame Ethel's C minor sonata begins like this.
Well, it's a beautiful piece. It sounds, extraordinary. I can see the obvious Schubert inference, but maybe, people start with a certain note and then they go to the minor third, so, it happens.
Who's to know?
Who's to know? Yeah. You've shared with us not only the extraordinary Bach, but also some works that I hadn't heard before. The beginning of each movement of the Bate Concerto, which is phenomenal, and the beginning of this, what seems to be a very compelling sonata, a C minor of Ethel Smythe. So,
never been recorded, this one, until I did it.
Another project. You've done it.
I did record it.
For you.
Actually, I have to be honest, it has been recorded, but for some reason, the previous cellist only played the theme from the theme and variation. So one movement is almost,
Okay. It's nice. I'm sure it's nice to have the whole thing.
Yeah. So I'm very pleased to do it, and
that's great.
Yeah.
So Any other thoughts that you have about, touring with your instrument, or playing, or practicing, or being involved?
Well,
I know that you have have had a very heavy touring schedule, which was cut short because of the pandemic.
Yes.
And this, I think you mentioned this is the first performance since March.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Absolutely.
We're lucky to have you here.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Well, thank you. And they talk about athletes, being match fit or not match fit. And however many concerts you've done, if you don't do concerts for a time, it does make it tricky. Yeah. And I feel, at my stage of my career, it's unfortunate, but not tragic. I feel very sorry, really, for my own children. 3 of my 4 children are musicians, and their playing careers have been very much blighted. We've been lucky; we've been able to carry on with the teaching, online teaching, so we don't have to go face to face. But musicians, my colleagues who are in symphony orchestras and chamber orchestras, they've been protected up till now, but the government can't go on. Yeah. And I feel very, very sore for the young freelancers of today, because it's very, very, very difficult.
It is very, very difficult, and orchestral concerts seasons, subscription seasons are canceled the world over. Yeah. In many places, I should say, the world over. Solo concerts and the like are non-existent at this time, and theaters are closed. Yeah. And yet, ironically, it's culture and exposure to art and creativity that helps sustain us best. Well, in times of trial and tribulation.
Absolutely.
So there's got to be a better balance somewhere.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, I know the situation now is very, very different from the flu epidemic of 1918. But a friend of mine went back and examined old archival copies of the New York Times from 1918 to explore, just out of curiosity, what happened then. There was this raging flu epidemic. People were dying everywhere. It's mostly younger people, but they were dying a lot, in large numbers.
Absolutely.
And my friend found out from consulting New York Times archives and articles that exactly nothing changed. Carnegie Hall was full. Rachmaninoff played a concert, and got a rave review, of course. Yeah. And so, it's a different mindset. Yes. And I'm not advocating one over the other, but I am saying that I think that each of us in our own way has to, in order to help sustain us during these times, be creative. Yes. And that's the best possible way. Yeah. And it's very difficult, I think, for musicians and actors and others who can't express the creativity in the ways that they are so used to doing.
Yes. I mean, I do feel very strongly that musicians in a large building like a church should be allowed to play small groups, socially distanced. Right. But there's these blanket regulations which are crushing the arts, I'm afraid. I'm supposed to be doing a Haydn concerto with a very small orchestra just before Christmas. Okay. We hope it'll happen.
Hope it happens.
Yes.
Well, everyone can be socially distant on stage and socially distant in the audience, but still share the same wonderful artistic experiences.
That's right.
So,
that's right. Yes.
I think that's important.
Good.
So, Lionel, thank you very much for being here with us. And
pleasure.
Thank you all for being part of this evening, and we look forward to subsequent music forums and your involvement as well. So, thank you all. Good evening.